Hey everyone, it's Sevi. So Genshin's new permanent endgame mode, Imaginarium Theater, has finally arrived. If you've yet to unlock it or still haven't familiarized yourself with its mechanics and rules, then this video is for you. I'll guide you through the basics, what to expect, some general tips, and my early thoughts on it. Now to be clear, this is an understanding the basics and first impressions video, not an in-depth clear guide, and the goal is to essentially familiarize you with this game mode. With that in mind, let's get right into it. Let's start with Imaginarium Theater's basic rules and guidelines. Entering the main menu, we can take a look first at the season's rules, and every season there will be restrictions as to which characters can be used. Now this season it's limited to Pyro, Electro, and Animo characters with a few exceptions which we'll get to later. Going into performance prep, we can see the different modes here. There's an easy, normal, and hard mode, and these will require different numbers of characters to enter and have different numbers of acts or battles to complete and different numbers of boss fights respectively. So for example, easy mode has 3 combat performances plus a boss at the end, normal mode has 6 combat performances and then 2 bosses to encounter, and hard mode has 8 combat performances with 3 bosses in here. And you can also see that hard mode needs 18 characters to participate in the challenge. So looking at the reward preview, can you get all rewards even on easy normal mode only? You can only get the max rewards by beating hard mode. So again, the higher the difficulty, the more characters you'll need and battles you'll have to fight. And hard mode needs a total of 18 characters at least level 70 and has 8 battles to finish. Now, just like Abyss, you don't need to sweat it if you can't do the hard mode in one go. It does need a lot of characters to even start, so just try the difficulty that's most doable for you to get whatever rewards you can, and then you can work your way up towards hard mode eventually. Now let's move on to the party setup where we can see the characters to select. This first page has the opening characters. This is also called the principal cast. Now these are the characters that you start with and they're required to be in your roster. You'll notice that you can choose from either your own builds, my characters here, or trial builds. There's also a fantastical blessing here, which this blessing buffs max HP, attack, and defense by 20%. And this takes effect both inside and outside Imaginarium Theater. So that's both in Overworld and in Abyss. I did check if it applies in Abyss and it does. And while you're on this page, you can also go to equipment configuration, and this is an opportunity for you to actually switch around your artifacts before it starts. Now we have the alternate cast of additional characters, and the number of alternate cast characters you can get, again, varies from difficulty to difficulty. In hard mode, you need 12 alternate cast members, and these will be from your own builds. There aren't any trial characters here, and you'll notice that the available characters in this big menu are all Electro, Pyro, and Animo. And then there's also a special guest cast here that you'll notice actually isn't Electro, Pyro, or Animo. So we have some variations here. We have Risley, Baiju, and Alhaitham their Dendro, and we have Sijmin here for Hydro, and she's currently blacked out on my menu because I don't have her level to the minimum requirement. And these are basically the exceptions that I mentioned to the season's element and character restrictions. So another way that you can bring in an alternate cast member aside from your own builds is by inviting a supporting cast member from your friends. Here, I have invited Baiju from one of my friends. I can invite another character from another friend, but basically it only allows you to have one at a time. Now, considering the special guest stars and the exceptions to the Animo, Pyro, Electro restriction, I do suggest you take advantage of them since they can at least bring in other reactions such as Quicken using Dendro along with Electro teammates, or Melt by using Risley with some Pyro teammates. So this is very important to remember. Your builds are snapshotted upon starting the performance, and changing a character's build outside while a run is active won't affect their actual build in the performance battles. Okay, so let's say that I've invited these characters as my current alternate cast. Now, what are the rules per character in going to the battle? So here's a reminder that the character's equipment and state will be locked after the challenge begins. And these are the characters you'll be starting with in the first round. When you complete combat events or choose companion events, you will be able to bring in alternate cast members to join the principal cast. So let's start this. Choose this as our normal battle mode. And then let's look at the lightning icons down here. So these are basically the vigor points. Each character starts with 2 vigor, which is the maximum number of times you can use them in battle, unless you gain like a card or a buff or event that refreshes that vigor. Then let's say we choose these characters. They each have 2 vigor now, but once we finish this battle, they're only going to have 1 vigor remaining each. So this vigor limitation is definitely a major part of this challenge. Alright, now let's take a look at what happens during a run. So again, you start with a principal cast as your only roster. It's through completing acts and selecting certain boon cards that you can add characters to your selectable roster, and the added characters will always come from the alternate cast that you chose at the start. So before the first act, you start with 100 Fantasia Flowers. This is a currency which you can spend on boons or buffs or events basically, and then gain from completing the acts or battles. So the events that you can choose from include Wondrous Boons to get combat-related buffs that last for the entire run, companion events which let you add more characters, there's a mystery cache which gives random benefits, and then after picking non-combat event, you can refresh all events except combat events after choosing. You also have a chance to get an external audience support for extra bonuses. Then there's a limited amount of refresh event uses which you can see on the lower right if you prefer to get other events. There's also a combat event to progress your acts, and these also add a character after the fight. For each combat event, there are goals that can give you Fantasia Flowers, and then there's one goal which gives a star reward for basically bragging rights. There can also be stage effects that you want to pay attention to, and then there are hints on what's effective against the specific enemies. So for example, it might say Pyro is more effective, or having a grouping unit is more effective, or Electro, and so on. Then there are normal, battle defense, which is just defending a monolith, elite, and 3 boss or climactic showdown fights. So those are the different types of combat events you can choose from, and also some of the things that you want to pay attention to when you go into the combat events. During the actual combat, you can restart the combat stage to reselect characters, and the vigor won't be consumed by the restart. You can also choose the rewind option, which brings you to after the last boss challenge. So let's say that this fight isn't really going well because you feel like you don't have the characters that you wanted for this fight because you used them up in a previous fight, then that's where the rewind button comes into play, because it actually lets you go back a couple of stages all the way to after the last boss fight. And then if you completed the goals already, you can actually end the fight early. Can you use less than 4 characters in a battle? Unfortunately, you are forced to use 4 characters every time, which means that every battle is going to consume vigor from 4 of your characters. There's no option to solo a stage with just 1 character or to just put 2 characters into the fight. You have to use 4 every time. So after every fight, you exit the menu and you basically go back to the comfy room where you found Wolfie and the Imaginarium Theater book. And during this time, you can talk to characters lounging around. And these characters will actually be the characters you used in the most recent fight. And they have multiple unique voice lines if you like hearing all of them, so you can repeatedly talk to them as well. Going around, there's also some books to collect. There's also a music player in one corner where you can change the area's music, and then in another corner, there's a cat machine thing that shows you this season's fortune. So we've gone through the basics of the game mode. We've also seen what happens during a run. Now let's talk about some tips that could help you along the way. First of all, early fights are quite easy, so you can expend your vigor on characters that you think aren't strong or aren't as built, just so that you can save your vigor on better characters for later fights and bosses. You already know what the bosses are and when they will appear. This season, the Dendro Chicken appears on Act 3, the Baptismal Bishop boss pair appears on Act 6, and Coppelius is on Act 8. So for example, saving a Pyro and or Usia unit for the Coppelius fight can make it easier. Now as I'm choosing events, I do prefer getting companion events at the start just to build up your roster of characters. Getting those companion events earlier can make things easier just so that you have more choice and you have more flexibility going into the later stages. But there are also effects you can get that let you bring back spent characters or refresh their vigor basically. So that, if you're lucky, also helps with your flexibility. Another tip is that if there are multiple options for the next battle, and there usually are between bosses, get to know your choices better. For example, once I had a choice between a battle versus ruin monsters and then a battle versus cryo and hydro slimes. Now I didn't want to spend that next battle getting frozen, so I chose the fight against the ruin monsters instead. You also don't necessarily need to get all the achievements, since those are just for increasing the number of Fantasia flowers you receive. In that same vein, it also it doesn't hurt to choose easier battles over elite battles if you just want a faster run. After all, the main difference is that you're going to end up with less Fantasia flowers. But individually, the card events aren't all that expensive, whether it's bringing in a new character or getting a buff or getting a mystery cache, so even just finishing normal battles will already give you enough Fantasia flowers to buy at least 1 or 2 each stage. Also, get friends who have really well-invested characters of those you can choose from. This is an endgame mode where we can finally get help from our friends, so use it to your advantage if it can help you a lot. And on your end, feature your best character or ones you know they don't have to help them out. And it's a bonus too if they have a well-invested character or if you have a well-invested character to share. Now that we've gone over the basics of the game mode, what a run looks like, and some tips to help you along the way, let's talk about my first impressions and how I think it compares to Abyss. The first thing I want to mention is that they made this game mode feel a lot more whimsical and cute compared to Spiral Abyss. You have an adorable concierge, you can talk to characters between battles, and the battle stages also have cool elements and environments as well. It basically feels like they put in a lot of effort to make this not feel as serious as Abyss. And it's also different enough from Spiral Abyss as an endgame mode and sets different goals for players in my opinion. For example, when it comes to Spiral Abyss, you can likely perform consistently well there with just 2 to maybe 4 well-optimized teams depending on what element checks are present in the cycle. And those teams can even have common characters between them. Vertical investment also, such as better artifact builds, better weapons, constellations, will just make those fights easier. And while vertical investment can help in your Imaginarium Theater mode, the main challenge here is having enough characters that reach the minimum level requirement. Imaginarium Theater's hardest mode wants you to have 18 characters that are at least level 70. So yes, you can choose from the trial builds or friends characters, but that's still significantly more characters than Abyss asks of you. So essentially, it rewards you for horizontal investment and building up a wide, viable character roster. Past the initial hurdle of having enough characters, the skill check and DPS check of the battles in Imaginarium Theater seem much lower. The fights are generally easy as long as you understand the enemy's behavior here, there's no significant positioning strategies needed, and the elemental reaction/counter checks needed are tailored to the elemental restrictions anyway. And even when it comes to the monolith fight, it's pretty forgiving since you only need 15% HP remaining on the monolith to clear. Even suboptimal or less synergistic teams that you use because you're saving the better ones for later or that you just ended up with will still very likely clear. So really, I feel like the main concern when it comes to Imaginarium Theater is having enough characters that are sufficiently built and leveled up to get past the entry requirement and do decently enough in fights. Much of the strategy comes from planning the vigor usage so that you can have effective teams throughout the battles, and especially in the latter fights where you want to have the best characters on hand. But those extra elements of RNG and bonuses can make some runs more favorable, like regaining vigor for characters, being able to select a specific character to get, adding more Fantasia flowers, etc., which Abyss obviously doesn't have. Again, this is how I feel about Imaginarium Theater compared to Spiral Abyss, but of course, I can't speak for everyone's experience, and this will depend on your progress level as well. So just a reminder, if you don't have enough characters built yet, then you don't have to spread yourself so thin to level up all these different characters just to unlock the entry into the hard mode. It takes time to get the resources to level up and build so many characters to even get them to a decent functional level. One thing I will say about Imaginarium Theater is that I think it could have more replayability elements added to incentivize repeated runs past the Primo rewards. Hopefully those get added in the future, maybe they will bring in some new mechanics, similar to how Honkai Star Rail was updating simulated universe mechanics, but that's just me. Having said all that, I'm not sure yet how to do a season-specific guide like how I do with each Spiral Abyss cycle. I'm going to see what my next follow-up video on Imaginarium Theater will be and what regular format I can do, if at all. If you have finished Imaginarium Theater and have advice for players getting into it, comment them down below as well so that we can help each other out. But those are my thoughts so far on Imaginarium Theater, and that's what I can share in this video. So if this helped you out or if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!